Hi everyone, how's it going? Up to this point, my post-Core 2 and ban list videos have been on a rather negative note in terms of talking about what I feel are rather degenerate in the current metagame. But now that I've more or less gotten all of these out of the window, having already talked about how strong Magnum Opus is and how strong acid spam is, and with the recent incident, having seen some of the degenerate lists the Glasshouse crew may have brought to Worlds had they not been outed. Um, well, it kind of makes me feel better that a lot of my lists that look degenerate actually don't look that degenerate anymore when you compare it to the CI or Gagarin list. Anyway, that aside, I think I can now safely close this case and allow the Worlds goers to deck brew, come up with strategies, and show the world how degenerate the current meta can be. For now, though, since we're not attending Worlds, we are going to look at some more fun lists. Today, we are going to look at what is probably one of the more viable builds of Anarch. It's so hard to build an Anarch deck nowadays, and very much so. As I built this list, I found that a lot of my card choices were dictated for me simply because there wasn't any choice. Anarchs have very few options nowadays, so let's get into what are compelling reasons to play Anarch and how my deck is shaped based around that. This is a Valencia list that plays kind of like Shaper in the sense that you build a rig and you get lots of money through Magnum Opus and you break ice the normal way. Of course, there's different tricks from Shapers, so let's look at that. What are some good reasons to play Anarch? First, their multi-access suite. Unlike Shapers, which dig R&D with the likes of indexing or deep data mining, Anarchs have to resort to milling as their form of multi-access. And this is actually pretty viable now compared to the past because Jackson is no longer a thing. So milled agendas are not going back to the core unless they're running preemptive action or the like. As such, Anarchs will want to use milling. If you are looking to do multi-access, I think you should be playing the other factions instead. It's also worth noting that mill effects tend to be persistent, unlike with multi-access. The strong multi-access on HK and R&D nowadays tend to be one-off events, like those I mentioned earlier, whereas milling effects such as Maw and Bagat, these are persistent in that they activate once every turn as long as you make a successful run or a successful access with the correct conditions. Therefore, these basically shape Anarch to be a kind of late game powerhouse where if you let them get too many Maw or Bagat triggers off, which means dragging out the game for a while, the Anarch player is more likely to come out advantageous because they would have gotten a lot of mills off. So this is one big reason to play Anarch. Maw and Bagat are still very strong cards, and Maw especially can be really disruptive to any any corp that relies on combo pieces. Let's look at Cutlery now. Cutlery is one really defining aspect of Anarchs, the ability to trash ice. Criminals can only de-res ice, and Shapers don't really have any ways in which to interact with ice apart from breaking them the normal way. Therefore, Cutlery is seen as a very strong method of dealing with certain problem ice. We've seen that Tour Guide can be really nasty to an unprepared runner, but there are also other ice like Kakugo and Data Loop that you don't really want to deal with nowadays. With Parasite gone, Cutlery remains the only way to deal with this, and being expensive in terms of influence, naturally, this is a big reason to play Anarch if you're worried about such ice. What about Conspiracy Breakers? Now, these aren't really efficient. No one really wants to play them. A lot of Anarch builds in the past rely more on the standard Anarch Breaker suite of what was Mimic and York with Data Suckers, but now that York is gone, there just isn't a good decoder around. Therefore, this leaves Anarch with very few breaker options, not to mention that Faust is gone as well. Conspiracy Breakers are probably the go-to breaker option. They cost no influence at all, but they allow you to break any ice in the game as long as you have enough money. God of War is another possible Anarch breaker, specifically tailored for tag me strategies. Outside of that, God of War is probably not what you're looking for. Eater is another powerful breaker. As soon as it came out in Order and Chaos, people have noted that it's above the power curve in terms of an AI breaker. However, its restriction is now a huge problem. With Siphon and Vamp out of the card pool, it's a lot harder to utilize Eater properly. The only way I can see it being used currently is in an Apocalypse-based deck. because Apocalypse still triggers even though you cannot access cards, and that really is the only powerful card left in my opinion that can work around the no access restriction. David finally is a support option available to all Anarchs and really should be played in most, if not all, Anarch decks. It's the fairy of Anarchs, and a more powerful fairy at that, because the nasty eyes that tend to trap you and deal nasty face check damage are those that have strength 5 and higher. David is a very powerful card. Now that it's off the most wanted list, I think every Anarch deck should be running at least 2 copies. So in this deck, we'll be running Conspiracy Breakers, backed up by David. Makes a lot of sense because high strength eyes are very hard to break with Conspiracy Breakers. David will help us with that. What about consistency? Shapers have the SMC, Criminals have the Special Order, Anarchs have Frantic Coding, and this is another big reason to stick to the Conspiracy Breaker suite. When you play Frantic Coding, you are able to search through a fifth of your deck, 10 out of 50 cards from Valencia for that turn 1 Magnum Opus, or failing that, any other breaker. At the same time, it pitches the rest of your Conspiracy Breakers into the bin, which in this case, the bin acts like your SMC in Shaper, in that you can tutor up your breakers mid-run as long as they're in your bin. This makes Frantic Coding and Conspiracy Breaker Suite a very powerful combination, and I expect a lot of Anarchs in this day and age to be running this combo, simply because it affords you the flexibility of being a Shaper, whilst also giving you very early, huge early consistency by digging through your deck for the very key Magnum Opus. Page Piper and Frantic Coding is a synergy that I've always loved. It's a pet favorite of mine, and I saw no reason not to use it here. Even though this deck is nearly half events, which don't trigger Page Piper, the rest of the deck is a lot of 2-offs and 3-offs that you don't need in multiples. You don't need 2 Magnum Opuses, you don't need 2 of your bin breakers, nor do you need 2 Bagards or 3 more. So all this can go in the bin and thin your deck, and that's very important. Therefore, I think Page Piper is a worthy include in this deck. Also helps that it synergizes with Frantic Coding, allows you to conserve the rest of your deck when you play Frantic Coding. For those of you who are not aware, once you have Page Piper down, the interaction with Frantic Coding is that you can trigger Page Piper on your Frantic Coding install, which allows you to shuffle your deck before you're forced to trash the other 9 cards. This conserves your deck, which is especially important against certain strategies like Scorpios and Jinteki running Obokata Protocol. So now that we have talked about the main reasons why you want to play Anarch, let's look at the rest of this deck in order, starting with the card that we are going to use as our restricted card, Magnum Opus. You'll notice that having talked about a lot of the key reasons to play Anarch, one very distinct factor that's missing is Anarch economy. Anarch has no economy. If you think to all the competitively viable Anarch decks in the past, they never had in-faction economy. They had to rely on splashing good economy from other factions. Noise with Aesop's Pawn Shop is an example. Temujin for wizard that is the Reg Wiz that won Worlds last year, or Desperado in decks like Valencia Desperado. Siphon for Anarch Siphon. All these Anarch decks rely on non-Anarch cards for economy. Either that, or they were playing Anarch cards that didn't need money at all. In other words, Faust. Your Double Folk deck did not need much money at all because Faust broke ice for free. Because of this, because of the ability to have a complete powerful deck by only importing economy cards from outside, Anarch was very powerful for the last year or so. They had in-faction already pressure with Keyhole and Medium. They had good breakers with the Anarch Breaker Suite with Faust and with David. So they really had everything they needed in faction except for economy. In this post-Core 2 and rotation world, not only have they lost their best breakers, not only have they lost their best R&D multi-access, they did not gain any economy cards. So this was why in the past Anarch was powerful. You could just go MWL shopping. You could afford to spend influence on your in-faction cards on the MWL because all you needed to import was economy. Now, not only do you have to import economy, you still have to worry about the other factors as well. You're using subpar breakers and subpar R&D digging multi-access in the form of Maw and Bagat. So there you go. So back to this point. Sorry for diverting there, but yes, it is worth spending that restricted slot on Magnum Opus and the 6 influence that goes with it, simply because you need that powerful economy, and as we discussed in the Shaper video, Magnum Opus is the best you have right now. Okay, now we can move on to the other cards, starting with Hacktivist Meeting. Still one of the best anti-asset spam counters out there, as I mentioned in the Gagarin video. Since you cannot rebirth into Wizard, the next best thing you can do is to throw down a Hacktivist Meeting to slow them down. Indexing. Indexing is an interesting choice. I mentioned that Maw and Bagat are usually good enough for getting Anarch multi-access, but towards the mid-late game, sometimes running through 2 or 3 pieces of powerful ice just to get a single access and a Maw or a Bagat trigger is just not enough. Indexing is the key card that allows you to close out the game quickly while also applying some early pressure. Furthermore, it also synergizes with the next card we're going to talk about, which is Mad Dash. You already want Mad Dash in your Valencia deck, because if you're milling lots of cards from R&D and HQ with Maw and Bagat, chances are there's a very good chance that an agenda will land there, and without Jackson to save the co-op nowadays, Mad Dash can easily net you a free trigger on Mad Dash if you just target archives with it. Therefore, you already want Mad Dash, and indexing just makes Mad Dash even more valuable, giving you 2 ways in which Mad Dash can potentially trigger. Rebirth is a must play in all Valencia decks. Even though you lose the wizard target, there's still lots of other good NR IDs. This is still true even post-rotation. Most of the time you rebirth into Omar, but there are definitely other cases where other IDs are good. Retrieval Run synergizes super well with this deck. Even though the bin breakers do not require Retrieval Run for install, you still need it to install, for example, Magnum Opuses if they come off your injects. And I think the most key use of it, especially in the mid to late game, is to recur Davids. With so many 3 subroutine big high strength ice, Davids, you can easily run out of David counters and you don't have E3 feedback in plants. So the next best thing you can do is to recur those Davids, use retrieval runs like clone chips, and yeah, get past these high strength ice repeatedly. It also helps that David breaks ice for free, because you can combo retrieval run David into a fork or a spoon to get rid of nasty ice such as Fairchild 3. We move on down to Page Piper. Actually, I explained this already, so let's move on to the next one. Same old thing. There are lots of events in this deck, so same old thing grants you the flexibility to recur these again. It helps that you're dumping most of your deck into the bin with Frantic Coding, which allows same old thing to have a lot more options, and it gives you the flexibility. Sometimes indexing is what you want to recur the same old thing. Otherwise, it might be Cutlery. You might be up against a Glacier deck, and you might want to recur those spoons to clear the ice away. Next up, we have Misdirection. I really had no idea what to spend on this last 2 influence, so I went with a hate card that could potentially screw this deck over really hard. Hard Hitting News into Boom is a 2-card combo that I don't really have an answer for outside of Maw. So Misdirection will hopefully, limit the damage, or at least slow down those hard-hitting news decks, because this deck might not be able to keep up with in terms of economy against hard-hitting news, considering how expensive it is to use the bin breakers. This is definitely flexible. I think if you are going to copy my deck, you should think of using this 2 influence for something else. I've been thinking of cards like Legwork, Utopia Shard. There are lots of different options worth exploring. Interestingly, my opponent's on 49 card Gagarin. Just like me, they want to examine the potential power of asset spam without committing to Museum of History. This should be an interesting match. I'm definitely going to mulligan my opening hand here no matter what, because as usual with any Magnum Opus deck, if you don't have Opus in your opening hand, you better mull. That's just the way it is, because if you don't have Magnum Opus, you have no economy at all. There's no question you're going to fail the game. Even though I'm running a 50 card deck, between injects, retrieval runs, frantic codings, and the 3 opuses themselves, I find it hard to imagine that there will be games where I'm knocked out of Magnum Opus. So there we go. We mull for an opus, we got it. But we're up against asset spam. Could be a problem, except that our opening hand has Hacktivist as well. This should make for a pretty good game. So the plan here is, usually you would take 6 after playing the Magnum Opus, but since we need to Hacktivist here, we'll just take 4 and then drop the Hacktivist to make life a bit harder for our opponent. Now, it's not like Gagarin doesn't have any solutions to this. Everyone knows that Hacktivist is a huge counter to asset spam, and very likely my opponent's packing some currents themselves. Here they res a commercial bankers group, probably the only asset worth resing in the midst of Hacktivist meeting. Even then I'm questioning it because it is quite a price to pay, a random card from your hand. That could be the consulting visit they played here. But nope, I think they drew the consulting visit from R&D manually, and because of that, they were able to get rid of my Hacktivist by playing consulting into paywall. So this is a pretty good combo as well. Consulting allows you to find the few paywalls in your deck that much quicker. Well played to my opponent for that. So my turn, obviously I trash the commercial bankers group as explained in the Gagarin video. Even if you don't expect to outmoney Gagarin by mid to late game, you should still control the CBGs because sandbugs can do nasty things to you. And then I took lots of money with Opus. You'll notice that I didn't try to find my next Hacktivist last turn because I was worried about hard-hitting news. Here, now that I have same old thing, I'm going to drop it here and ask my opponent if they want to res any assets before I same old Hacktivist. They really should, but they chose not to because they were pretty poor. On 6 credits, resing anything would be a heavy cost to pay. So then I played a Hacktivist and now they're stuck not being able to res assets again. This should make things really hard for them. So yeah, being forced to draw with their clicks is another big problem. In the past, asset spam used to have Sensei Actors Union for good draw. My opponent has no such draw, so they're spending valuable clicks drawing up. They also protect HQ here, indicating to me that agendas have hit their hand and I should be able to get them if HQ is unlocked. And that's quite important because if they did not ice HQ, I would be dropping more and running the heck out of that HQ. Now we see a second bankers group go up. My opponent paid a card for that, so I'm happy with that. And now they decide what to do on their turn. That Hacktivist is really causing them a lot of problems. It is slowing down the tempo a huge bunch. And yeah, to me it's worth it. For me, it only cost me a credit to play a Hacktivist. Maybe a couple more clicks with the same old thing. But for them to match the Hacktivist, to get rid of it, they can't score agendas because their agendas are not scoreable. They have no plan of scoring agendas, so their only other option is to play paywall, which they do right here. In fact, they had to use consulting visit for the paywall, so not only they have to spend an extra click to play the consulting visit, they had to spend 2 credits as well. So these 2 credits are a huge deal because for me, I'm making 2 credits a click with Magnum Opus. My opponent does not have this economy engine, so every time they use consulting visit, it's so expensive. It costs them too much tempo. So now that I've lost the current war, unfortunately, I'm gonna go with my next vector of attack. I moored R&D and I did not get a more trigger because I stole a Hollywood renovation off the top. Then I went to trash a CBG. So no more triggers this turn. I would have loved to get a more trigger, but unfortunately for me, I stole an agenda. What a pity. A 3-point agenda. Sorry. So yeah, no more this turn, but the good news is that unlike the single-use event that you know, shapers or criminals have like legworks or maker's eyes, more stays on the board forever. And now I'm looking to get some serious more triggers going. So after getting a bunch of money, I'm gonna spend my last click running, hoping that there's no snare on the table. Snares won't really affect me anyway. 1 tag is not enough to kill. So I run and I see a Wampo Reclamation here. Now normally this is a must trash. As I mentioned in the Gagarin video, you don't want them burying agendas when you have no way to reshuffle R&D. But in this case, I found the more trigger to be more important. So I used the more trigger to get rid of a card from the hand. Now, here comes a very sweet move from my opponent. They res the Wampoa, bottom a card from the hand into R&D. So there's that card at the bottom of R&D. They now res Shannon Claire to play the card from bottom of R&D. That is the paywall. They buried one of the paywalls from their bin into R&D and then used Shannon Claire to fetch it. That is an amazing combo. Unfortunately for them, it took them their whole turn to do that combo and it cost them a lot of credits. Resing Wampoa costs 3 credits. That is so expensive for a Gagarin that doesn't have any money going at all. So my first click, I ran the Wampoa to trigger more. Second click, I ran the Wampoa to actually trash it. So there goes that combo. Because Shannon Claire is too expensive for me to trash, so I decided to go for the Wampoa instead. Once you disrupt one of their 2 combo pieces, the Wampoa Shannon combo, their combo is dead, right? Because if they don't have Wampoa, they can't reliably bury cards onto their R&D, which means that they cannot reliably fetch cards with Shannon Claire. So yeah, my opponent has lost that combo. They got to use it once, which was really sweet because it allowed them to get the paywall up. And that paywall supposedly is the icon engine, but they don't have the access to it now. And now they have to continue playing with a low credit pool and with their eyes all spread out. There's eyes on R&D, HQ, and the remote. I'm not sure what is guarding, but from what I can see, Asset Spam doesn't usually run a lot of ice. And if they have dedicated their eyes on two of the centrals and a remote, and Archives is uniced, guess which server I'm going to attack? I've already gotten a couple of more triggers, and I have a Rebirth in hand. I am definitely thinking of going on my third vector of attack here, after the Hacktivist, after the Maw. I'm going to Rebirth into Alice, and get them to mill 2 cards a turn. 1 mill from Maw, 1 mill from Alice. Now the good thing about playing with Valencia against Gagarin is that your ID ability, giving a bad pup, basically cancels out Gagarin's ability completely. This means that unlike other runners, you can actually get 3 more triggers by running their face down remotes. Other runners would need to pay 1 credit to access the asset and then trash it with more if they are, using more. By my case, I get to get 3 more triggers, and then here I run Archives to get the second mill with Alice, and my opponent felt that this was too much for them. Asset Spam losing 2 cards from the hand per turn is way too much, and they probably had some agendas in there already, so my opponent conceded at this point. They were just not going to win with so much Asset Spam disruption going on. As easy as their victory looked, I need to add a disclaimer that this was pretty much a nut draw. Within the top 9 cards of my deck, I managed to find 2 of my 5 Hacktivists, including the 2 same old things. Managed to also find a Maw, a Rebirth into Alice, and of course the all-important Magnum Opus that would sustain my economy for the rest of the game. That is incredibly lucky. I only needed to draw 4 cards after drawing my starting hand in order to have all the tools I need to deal with Asset Spam. This was a game where breakers were rather irrelevant until the mid game, which never rolled around because my opponent never had enough ice to bring me to the late game. So yeah, that being said, this is how you defeat Gagarin. You find your powerful cards that can deal with Asset Spam, and you try to find the various vectors of attack, placing the pressure time and time again to drain the tempo until eventually they are forced to concede. Because I got so incredibly lucky with my card draw, I didn't really get to show much of gameplay tactics you can use to deal with Asset Spam. Really, the only gameplay decisions I made were to trash the Commercial Bankers group and to get more triggers. That's about it. So apologies, I didn't get to show the more interesting side. This was mostly just about finding my hate cards quickly and playing them in succession. So yeah, if anything you've learned from this video, it goes to show you that even though Anarch has lost Wizard and Asset Spam seems more powerful than ever, Anarch is still the best faction to deal with Asset Spam because they have so many cards that still pose a lot of problems to Asset Spam. Turns out that without Friends in High Places and Jackson Howard, Asset Spam still it struggles to deal with these Anarch disruption tools. Well, of course that was a very short gameplay video. I'm not gonna leave you hanging like that. Tune in next time where we will pilot this Valencia deck against a faster agenda scoring corp deck. Thanks for watching, happy net running. I'll see you next time.